All right, welcome back, everyone. So now we're going to finish up this portion of the program and talk about reimbursement, which is everyone's favorite topic. So I'm joined by Stephanie Kennan, who is the Senior Vice President for Government Relations. And she had a great talk that you hopefully watched in the recorded presentations, but we'll ask her to kind of give you some highlights in case you missed it. And then Dee Kolanek, who is VP for Reimbursement at Insightech and has just a wealth of experience in reimbursement. So I guess I would just start by, Stephanie, if there were folks who were unable to watch your presentation, can you just share a few main highlights and take-home messages for us?
Sure, and thank you for having me this year again. I think that the top take-home points of my presentation is you can talk about reimbursement, but in order to have reimbursement, you also need coverage, and you kind of need to work both of those sides of the coin together. You can get a reimbursement level, but if it's not covered, they're not going to pay it. If it's covered and you don't have a reimbursement, they don't know what to pay you. And this within Medicare. So this is really important to know that you need to work both sides. The other is that you have a strategic decision to make, which is either to go for a national coverage decision, which is run out of Baltimore, headquarters of CMS, probably takes about a year. And that's the good side. The downside is if you get a negative coverage decision or you get a coverage decision with lots of criteria that really don't enable you to grow or maneuver, it's very hard to come back from that. The other strategy is a local coverage decision, and that is very time consuming. You have to go Medicare contractor by Medicare contractor. But working with the contractors also gives you some flexibility to get slightly different decisions, and it also allows you to make to really get to know the medical directors, which comes in handy later on when you're trying to do different kinds of pricing. The medical directors all talk to each other, so they are aware of what each one is doing. I had a client once where out of the blue, all the medical directors actually announced the same policy and claimed there was no discussions in between, but they all had the same language, so they do talk to each other. The last point I'll just make on reimbursement is that you need to go into CMS to talk to them about what goes in to actually providing the service. And they are going to look for something that they're familiar with. So there may be a device that they are familiar with, and they're going to say, oh, it's just like this, or it's a service and it's just like this. If it's not, you need to be able to prepare to really go to them and with an understanding of how it is different from that particular service or procedure. And lastly, once you do have a reimbursement level, you're going to have to continue to go back and look at every single rule that is proposed with every single payment change within Medicare for your device. And because they will continue to refine it, and you need to be able to go back in and justify what you want as a reimbursement level. I'll end there.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. So Dee, I just wanted to ask, you to sort of maybe opine on your, experience with obtaining reimbursement for Focused Ultrasound, and you've had a lot of success, and specifically in neurological applications. So do you have any kind of overarching insights or tips to share?
Absolutely, and thanks for the opportunity. So I think probably the biggest thing that advice I can give to anyone going down that pathway is to start early. It's critical that not only do you start early, but that you also collaborate with your regulatory team as early on as possible when you're developing the clinical trials to ensure that all of the criteria are met from a coverage perspective, and there's no cookie cutter. with the health plans and Medicare as far as what data they're looking for, whether it's level 1, whether it's level 2 or 2B, whatever it is. They're mainly looking for safety, efficacy, and durability. They like to see studies that are at least 2 years is the best, or is the preferred is 5 years, obviously. And we know that that takes a lot of time, to get the 5-year data not only collected, but then analyzed and then published. Also, in the U.S., it's critical that the studies that you're performing is on U.S.-based populations and are published in U.S.-based clinical review or journals. And so starting early on, collaborating with your regulatory team, and that's really from a coverage perspective. Payment is a completely different animal. When you think about market access and what constitutes reimbursement success for your device, it literally boils down to coding, coverage, and payment. You cannot have one without the other. And Stephanie made a great point, in her summary, that you have to start early, you have to be diligent, and you have to have a strategy, before you hit the ground running. From an inside tech perspective, I've been doing health policy and reimbursement and market access for over 18 years with many different manufacturers over the span of my career. And one of the things that I have found is, having that strategy and that roadmap early on, whether it stays that way or it changes, is a critical piece. And we chose from an inside tech perspective, rather than going down the pathway of getting a Category 1 CPT code, which is what everybody thinks is the end-all be-all code, we chose the route of going down the pathway of getting a Category 3 code, which is a temporary code or a T code or a tracking code. And the reason we did that is probably over the last 10 or so years, the AMA CPT editorial panel has been tending to give Category 3 codes to new technologies out the gate, regardless of the data that you have. So we went pre-FDA approval to AMA CPT editorial panel, secured a Category 3 code, so we could then push the payment side from the Medicare perspective, because in our space and our indication, 75 to 80% of the patients are Medicare age population. So we wanted to start that process early. And then also, just to kind of follow up on what Stephanie was saying, once you get a code and you get coverage in place and you get your payment level set, it's a never-ending job. You're always monitoring, any LCD or national coverage determinations. And I'll tell you, I do not recommend a national coverage determination unless you have 5 to 10 year data. The risk is so high at getting a negative national coverage determination that not only will you never get Medicare beneficiaries covered, but it trickles down to the private payers. Private payers look and say, well, what's Medicare doing? Well, Medicare has a negative national coverage determination. But I think one of the key points is keeping up with the payment level. Every year, if you're paid out of the hospital outpatient prospective payment system, OPPS, Medicare revalues or looks at payment level every single year. And it's critical that your facilities that are billing your procedure out of a hospital outpatient department understand how their hospital cost reports truly impact future payments. So I'll pause there. I know it's kind of long, but just wanted to kind of give a very, high level based on my experience and what I would recommend.
Well, that was great, Dee. So I think, you touched on some of the levels of evidence that's required for reimbursement. So when we think about focused ultrasound, what are some specific, like the biggest challenges for focused ultrasound, or have been the biggest challenges in focused ultrasound in obtaining that level of evidence or the right amount of evidence?
Well, what I've found in my personal experience in dealing with the medical directors at not only the Medicare side, the local contractors, but also the private payers, is the number of patients in the study, the outcomes, how long the study was. They like to see, like I said, a minimum of 2 years, 5 years, the best. And we just continue going down that pathway. Another thing I think that's critical, and which kind of plays into that early on, working collaboratively with the regulatory team to ensure that the outcomes endpoints are met. They also, over the last 15 to 20 years, they all want to look at randomization. They want randomized control trials, and in the focused ultrasound space, especially from an inside tech perspective, one of the pieces that's been the most challenging is randomizing to standard of care, because you have a highly invasive procedure versus a completely, incisionless procedure. So it's very hard. So you have to be creative in challenging the medical directors and those that are making those coverage decisions at every level on that piece.
And I would just add that I think there's a real interest within Medicare to also know about follow-up. How good and how long does this particular service last, and will patients need to come back in for an additional service? So that's another question they've been asking a lot of lately for a variety of devices.
Those are great points. So, a lot of this discussion over the last few days, when we're thinking about using focused ultrasound to treat glioblastoma, we tend to be directed more now towards these drug device combination approaches. So I'm wondering, we're still early in this game and really going through the regulatory process, but what are going to be some unique challenges for reimbursement with these combination approaches? If both of you could speak to that.
Well, let me start with sort of some past history within CMS in particular. Basically, combinations devices, CMS had a very hard time initially trying to figure out how to deal with them in a reimbursement world. And I think the earlier somebody goes in and talks to them and gets them comfortable with the concept for something new, like what you're working on, is probably the more informed they are, the easier the time will be for a conversation about reimbursement and coverage. They probably don't have a lot right now to draw upon except their past experience, which was a little bit tortured in trying to get to the right places and honestly, for basic things like insulin pumps, which really took a while for them to sort out. Something more complicated, I think they would want to have much better information earlier about what it is, what kind of drugs, and the science behind it, frankly.
Do you have anything to add, Dee, or? Uh-oh. Maybe she's frozen. Okay. So we did get a question just now from the audience. As the complexity of focused ultrasound delivery is moving forward, what strategies of complexity of CPT code are being developed? So I think just are there advancements in kind of creative thinking and CPT codes as we're developing these more innovative treatments?
Is Dee back yet? Because that's something she's really good at, but I can talk a little bit. The importance of at the CPT level is really getting the medical specialties involved so they can help advocate. And the better, the more they understand, the better they can advocate for a code. And I don't do a lot of CPT coding, so I'm not the best person to answer, but I know that they are looking at more advanced kinds of devices and service delivery so they can try to keep current. But it's completely within, the CPT process is completely within AMA. It's not a government process. It's a long story about how that happened, and some people in the government aren't happy about it. But it's really, really reliant on the specialties to advocate and to keep advocating as things get more complex.
So Dee, you may have missed that, but the question was around, as we're developing more complex and innovative treatments like focused ultrasound, are we also developing more creative and innovative CPT coding, to kind of go along with that? Like, is there also innovation on that side, on the CPT codes?
Yeah, and I think we absolutely, will be, and that's why it's critical to develop the relationship with the specialty societies early on as a manufacturer, to talk about the advances, because there's probably more than likely not going to be an existing CPT code. So it's that pathway of creating new. It's definitely going to be a challenge, not only for manufacturers, but also for the specialty societies, who are really going to be the drivers within the CPT, AMA CPT editorial panel on driving for those Category 1 codes and getting them assigned.
And so getting those specialty societies involved and engaged as early in the process is a good thing.
Hugely important. Yeah, because they're not only going to help drive the coding process, ultimately, but they can also help support coverage decisions within the payers, whether it's Medicare or privates. And not only that, one of the things that we really did was push them once we were able to really gain the support of the specialty society on focused ultrasound in the neuro space, was getting them to develop a positive position statement. So there's a lot of things, that are behind the scenes that you want to consider and start early as well. And that's definitely one of them. Great.
We also got another question kind of around, these focused ultrasound treatments. Some are going to be a single treatment, some are going to be more fractionated treatments. And then this idea of intensity modulation versus direct delivery. Just kind of more, there's a lot of things about focused ultrasound that are going to be similar to kind of radiation. And do you have any comments on that? They also mentioned kind of the role of physics support in this. That must be like kind of medical physics and pulling them into from the reimbursement standpoint. So this, just if you thought about any of this kind of aspect of focused ultrasound.
Well, I'll take a stab at it first. Again, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but I wouldn't assume that the staff, either in Medicare or within the private insurers, have the kind of understanding that you have of the physics, the science, everything, and why it may need to be a single shot in some places and fractionated in others, or multiple visits or whatever. And I have found this with several clients where they're so into what they're doing that they don't understand that the rest of the world isn't tracking it as closely as they are. So it's really important to be able to go in early and talk to people about what is going on. We just want to make sure you understand what's going on, because we'll be back to you to talk to you more about reimbursement and coverage. It doesn't hurt to talk to them early. It may be hard to get on their radar screen, but it doesn't hurt to talk to them early and start to educate folks. They may think they know, and they probably don't know as much as you think they know.
I agree. And I think that really comes with the relationship building with the specialty society, because they have ownership of those codes. And if it's looking, at, similar to radiation, where it's fractionals and et cetera, having those conversations early on, because you want to have a clear plan, roadmap on the coding structure. education is key. Private payers, not so much. They a lot of times won't meet. They haven't been meeting in years. They just say, send us your data, we'll consider it, we'll review it. And that's really it. You have to really, push the buttons and push the envelope with them to get them to agree to have a meeting. And now with, post-COVID or still in the middle of COVID or however you consider it, a lot of things are done virtually. So maybe a little bit more open to virtual meetings, but Medicare is going to be your key driver because they set the benchmark, top down. And then having the specialty society weighing in on from a coding mechanism. You have to have a code before you can get a payment, and Medicare has other avenues. They have level 2 HCPCS codes. If you're not ready to go down the pathway, for a category 3 CPT code or a category 1 or any CPT process, you still have to have a mechanism to get your facilities paid. And so Medicare has that through the level 2 HCPCS code. So you can apply for that. So there's a lot of different pathways to consider. We're all early on in this. And so I think, we still have some time, but I think the earlier we start, the better.
If I could just add one thing that's slightly off topic, but slightly on topic. It's something I've experienced with several clients recently. He used the 510K process at the FDA to get something approved. In picking up a predicate product, sometimes there was not good coordination within the company of what that predicate product was and what it would mean if they went for a HCPCS code or a CPT code, or how Medicare would look at it in terms of coverage. So another word of advice would be, if you're going to use the 510K process, everybody needs to sort of sit down and explore what it means by a predicate product and what it means down the road for your reimbursement levels.
Great, those are great points. We really are close to the end of time, but I just wanted to briefly mention, I know Stephanie, in your talk, you talked about the MCIT rule, the Medicare coverage of innovative technology. We've been really active in commenting on that and following that. And to let everyone know who doesn't know, that rule was delayed yet again until middle of December. And so I'm just wondering if, Stephanie, if you have any insight onto what this delay really means. Do we think there's going to be some major changes ahead when this is ultimately implemented?
Well, let me first start by saying it is very logical for a rule of this importance for an administration to say, wait a minute, let us look at it, particularly when it was released so late in the previous administration, regardless of who that administration was. So yes, the little bit of insight I have is that they are extremely concerned that the rules, the scope of what might be captured may be much larger than intended, and that the scope, and that it's a little bit undefined about why they think that, but they want to make sure they don't just agree with the policy globally. They want to make sure that they're understanding exactly who's going to fall into this rule, as opposed to having a surprise and finding hundreds going through instead of the handfuls they think will go through. And the other thing is that, yes, they do want to kind of put their own thumbprint on it as well. So I would expect some changes. Right now, I can't tell you if it's going to be significant changes because they really are sitting back and studying the rule, but I would watch for some changes.
Great. Okay, well, that's our time. So I just want to thank you both again. This has been a really fascinating discussion. And again, like I said, with the regulatory, we have a lot going on in the reimbursement space as well. And there'll be future programming, and we want to get you all involved in discussing these issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye.